Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Jennifer J.J. Manella, here with the co-host Drew Conry Murray. Today, we're bringing back one of our favorite guests. We have Akili Akridge. He's a former Baltimore cop who cut his teeth ripping apart mobile phones on the street, went undercover, eventually built and led mobile offensive and defensive teams for federal agencies and Fortune 100s. And these days, he's a self-described rugby player turned wellness bro and a straight-talking expert on all things mobile security. So today, we're digging into mobile threats, why they're keeping CISOs up at night, and what to do about them.
Yeah, so we get into issues around data privacy or lack thereof, and why even personal information can become an enterprise risk. We're talking about the pros and cons of engaging lockdown mode on mobile devices, what jailbroken and rooted mean in a mobile context, building strategies for high-value users who might be at risk of having their mobile devices targeted, some scanning and analysis tools to help you get better visibility into mobile app vulnerabilities, and more.
All right, Akili, we had you a few months ago back on episode 72 when we were kind of just starting to dig into BYOD, but we kind of started down the rabbit hole of like mobile threats in general outside of just personal devices. And Drew and I wanted to have you back and dig a little bit more into things. And I think we want to start with just understanding, applications and the threats related to all of the various apps that we have on our phones. Because we have, I think the average is like 80 to 100 apps per user on a phone.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually think that's on the low end, right? People
Yeah, me
download
too.
things. There's things that come all preloaded on your device that sometimes you don't even know about, and then you get spooked because you're like,
Yeah.
what is that? I never actually looked.
Yeah.
And I actually think there's a lot more apps on people's devices than they recognize. Sometimes they download things, especially nowadays, with the way uh not even it's not even corporate, with the way businesses are going now. It's almost as if you have to download someone's app in order to get convenience, right? And so I'll give you an example. I was traveling, I was going from I was traveling through Europe. Where I was going, it's irrelevant, but I was traveling through Europe, and I was flying, I believe it was Ryanair. It was my first time flying Ryanair. I bought the tickets online off the computer, right, in an old school style. I bought them off the computer, and when I showed up to the airport, they were like, "Hey, if you have the app downloaded, stand in this line. If you don't have the app downloaded, stand in this other line." Well, yeah,
Ugh.
and the line that was the other line for people who did not have the app downloaded was so long and moving so slow that I actually downloaded the app while standing in the line and then went to the other line. Like, I got it now. Can I get in? And so the idea is that they're almost forcing you to download an
Yeah.
application onto your device that you'll use maybe once. And then this is what I was getting back to. Like, I probably still have that Ryanair app lurking on
Mm,
my phone, right?
no,
Lurking on my
no.
phone that I should have deleted months ago, but I used it for literally the time span of getting through security.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I actually did the almost the same thing with I was coming back in the country from I think it was just Mexico. It was somewhere easy, and I have global entry. And for some reason, the global entry line was really long, but they had those kiosks where if you had the app, just the passport app, whatever thing, from the US, you could go to this other line. And I'm like, well, crap. All right, well, I'm just going to download this. So I was able to download it and go through all of the authentication and set that whole thing up and get into the other line, just like you did. But I would assume you're OCD like I am in that as soon as I'm done with something like that, I uninstall it. If I'm only going to use it less than
Yeah.
once a year, I immediately uninstall it. And then this past weekend, I was on a trip, and one of my girlfriends was like, "Why am I getting Snapchat notifications?" And I'm like, "I guess you have Snapchat installed." And she's like, "No, I don't remember. I don't remember installing it." And I'm like,
That,
I'm pretty sure it didn't install
yeah, I mean, the
itself. And then,
FBI would call
and
that a
then later
twig.
she's like, "Oh yeah, I remember, so and so was doing this thing and we were recording this thing and blah 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 blah." Anyway, yeah, so we all end up with this like sprawl of random crap on
Yeah,
our phones.
yeah.
But what's the risk though? Like, what is the potential threat to me of having Ryanair or some other random app that I just haven't. I don't
Yeah.
use
I mean, so
ever,
I
or I
just want
used
to
it once.
quickly go back to the whole point of like being in the airport, right? Of course, when you're in the airport trying to download this app, so is everybody else. So you're jumping on that degraded network. And for that fleeting moment, you're like, I can just connect to their open Wi-Fi for 5 minutes and download this package. Yes. Yeah,
YOLO.
you start making risky decisions when you're in a pinch. So the risk behind these applications, I want to be very clear. There's a difference between overtly malicious applications, right? Which are
Yeah.
applications that are coded to be malicious, right? Like they are there, they're banking Trojans, they're remote access Trojans. They're these applications that were built to siphon information or to get access to your data for nefarious reasons. Then there are poorly developed applications. And poorly developed applications are uh, very risky, right? They may not be overtly malicious, but if someone, a threat actor, gets their hands on these applications and they're able to decompile it or they're able to conduct some sort of analysis or research on it, and they can find, hey, here are some API keys, right? Here I found out that this app is communicating in the clear. There's an S3 bucket that this points to that's just open, right? There's all of these.
Wasn't there just like a series of a dating app or like an app for women who were
Oh, it was like
you,
called T or something.
Mhm.
yeah, 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 like so God, I'm gonna get this wrong, but it was something about an app where women could connect with other women to make sure they weren't, entering into bad or abusive relationships or
Oh,
something
wow.
like that, or they
Yes.
weren't dating the same
Right.
guy or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
That's interesting.
But it was meant to be women talking to other women, and so they had all of this. You had to like share
Oof.
your government ID and all this stuff to validate it, and then somebody made a copycat version, I think, for men, but also like same thing, right? API keys, hard coded
Yeah.
credentials, S3 bucket open, and like got access to everything.
Exactly. And so that's the thing. You have to look at applications, and application developers are looking to develop the application and get it out to market as fast as possible, right? There's very few times that an application or app developer is actually keeping security in mind on the front end, right? It's usually on the back end when something like that happens and they go, oh, and now they have to go back and create a bunch of updates and republish the application. But a lot of times, what you're dealing with are developers that do the same style of development every time. A lot of our mobile applications are basically kind of like Legos, right? It's a bunch of different third-party libraries, a bunch of different SDKs, a bunch of different API calls that are all kind of plugged and played and dropped into this application. So they're leveraging a lot of other people's or other functions that they don't have control over. And when you start releasing that control and delegating that control to some other function, or maybe possibly even a deprecated API, although it might work, it doesn't mean it's secure, right? So when you're downloading
Mm.
these applications and you're thinking, okay, this is great, it's super convenient, it let me get through the actual airline's line faster. And all I had to do is upload a photo of my passport, give them my address, right? And give them all of this sensitive information for me to get through this line in 20 minutes as opposed to 50, right? Then start to have to wonder what is actually happening with my data, right? Is this application leveraging insecure data storage, right? Are they leveraging encryption at all? Is the data that I just gave them, is that staying on my device or is it traversing to their cloud, right? And
Mhm.
especially nowadays with AI coming out, right? Everybody's plugging AI directly into their applications. AI is everywhere now, and it almost feels as if it's the gold rush. Everybody's trying to implement some sort of AI into their app for some reason, and you have.
Yeah, well, and Akili, I got to jump in and say this. This shocked me, but in one of our recent consulting things, one of the things we're hearing is that there are some enterprise buyers who are in their RFIs and RFPs basically saying they are not going to invest in products that aren't pursuing and leveraging
Hmm.
AI
Oh yeah,
as a blanket purchasing statement, which is just bizarre to me because now, yeah, the gold rush thing, you've got people just cramming
yeah,
crap into their product and their
yeah. Well,
code.
I listen. I'm not going to pass judgment, but what I will say is that that feels a little hasty, right? And I say that
Yeah.
because if you're implementing AI, does anybody really understand where that data is going? Like, who owns that data once you put it into that platform? Where does it go? Right? Does it pass through the actual? So, say I'm an app developer, or I'm the company that's leveraging this AI. Does it pass through me and go to the AI company? Right? Where is this data residing, and what's happening with it? Right? Is it being mined? Is it being sold? I mean, it's very likely.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. So on the mobile side of things, you've got you were talking about kind of overtly malicious
Mm,
apps versus just poorly made
right.
apps that are a little
Yeah.
leaky. But then I've also heard stories of, whole app ecosystems that are legitimately harvesting credentials and other information from phones and then selling that. And there's like apparently not anything specific legally to prevent them from doing that. And so there's this weird shady stuff about what data is available for sale
Mm,
that you may not know you're providing to somebody who's selling. And I think we saw this with some of the, the Facebook ads or whoever had ads, that was
yeah.
everybody was up in arms because various governments were buying that data, but they were completely legitimately buying
Yeah. Swaths
data that was legitimately for sale.
swaths of data. So I can put it like this, right? Everybody listening to this, to include the three of us on this podcast, our data is out there and it is for sale, right? Doesn't matter how hard you try to hide that you do all the things, right? You've got your Wi-Fi, you've got your firewalls, you roll incognito mode. it, it doesn't matter. That data, because we have become so dependent on cell phones, it is built into the device for it to collect mass amounts of telemetry about you. Now, you could be uh, somebody that has an ID associated with them of 1645732 and so on, right? But it's not directly associated with your identity of JJ until somebody makes that connection, right? So ultimately, it will collect everything else, right? But then when it starts to come down to naming it with JJ, it's like, oh no, it's not JJ, right? It's just, a woman that likes to lift. She knows a lot about technology and cybersecurity. She happens to travel a lot. She travels a lot via this specific airline. Her device is often around this specific location. She goes in and out of these specific areas. It's all of that telemetry data that is built around you, absent of your identity. That
Yeah.
that is what's for sale, and that's what's a gold mine because they can then turn around, sell that, and have it targeted. Now, the whole absent of your
So
identity piece, uh,
h- how do we
Right.
how do we know? Like how do we know that the apps are doing this? How do we know if an app is poorly made, if it's over permissioned, if somebody's selling or collecting
Oh, you're reading
data?
the EULA, aren't you, JJ? Every time you download an app?
That
yeah, that EULA, that
you
76
know,
scrolls long.
I'm gonna tell you something that's gonna shock some people and not the rest of you. I actually do usually read most of them. Not all of them on the phone because that's challenging. But I've had several situations where I've had an app, the TV recently.
Mm,
What brand of TV is that? I don't know. I have one brand upstairs, one brand downstairs, and it updated and basically said, we're going to update our privacy terms. And I was like, well, I'm going to read this. And it basically said, well, when you put this on the network, we will be collecting your viewing
Yep.
information, even if you're
Yeah.
not doing it through if you're doing it through a third party, like an Apple TV or whatever. And I was like, well, no, you're not. I'm just not putting this on the internet.
Yeah.
So voila. But obviously we don't have that, we don't have that choice with everything. But yeah, I do try to read the EULAs, and I feel fortunate that, we're so hyper connected in the world, because when one of us doesn't, somebody does, right? We
Well, I'm
saw
thinking there's
Zoom and
there's room for an app here, an LLM to read the EULAs for us and summarize what the privacy violations are. If somebody out there is wanting to code that up, I'll be in line with my
Uh,
money.
yeah, I can't even get the stupid AI things to summarize, 4 paragraphs appropriately. So good luck with
so I
that.
think there's something that we need to call out, and that is you read the EULA, right? And you say, okay, sure, I'll go through with this. And then come the permissions, right? I need permission to your camera. I need permission to your identity.
Yeah.
I need permission to
Your
contacts.
contacts.
I need permissions to your location. I need permission to all of these things. And you say, yes to the camera. I don't know why you need permission to the location, so no to the location. Okay. Do you think you truly have control over how that app is going to behave now that you've told it no to the location? Now, granted, you
I
would
would
hope
hope
so.
so.
Granted, you would hope so because you have told the phone that you're not giving permission to course and find location from this device. But there are applications out there that are like, that's okay. I'll figure it out another way. Right? Because there's other ways to
Yeah.
triangulate.
Or the app won't work. It just won't
Yeah,
run until you give it
exactly.
the permissions it wants, which is what
Yeah,
mine
or
tend
they'll
to
just
do.
block you out from the functionality. So it really boils down to a matter of take into account who you're going to be ultimately giving this information to. If it is too risky for you to say, yeah, I feel comfortable giving my permission to, and you look up whoever made the app, and it comes back to some strange name that is overseas, then maybe you don't feel comfortable with it. Acknowledge that risk and make a decision, right? Make an informed decision. Um,
So I want to poke back into when you said, okay, you didn't give me the permission, I'll figure it out, as
yeah.
the app. What are they
They can
doing?
triangulate your location off of, depending on how the app is coded, of course, right? But they can triangulate your location based off of various different things, right? Did you give them access to your network? Sure, because they need to be able to reach the internet. Sure, of course. So basically, if they're able to take a look at, hey, your mobile device, which earlier in the last podcast, I told you your device is promiscuous. It's always sitting in there saying like, hey, I'm looking for Wi-Fi. Where's the Wi-Fi? I need to connect the Wi-Fi just in case the Wi-Fi I'm on goes out. You can build a footprint of where you are based off of the location of the Wi-Fi's that you're close to, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, we covered a whole episode on that with the Apple.
Exactly.
I don't know what it
Yeah.
was called, but
That
leaking the SSID information, because you can geolocate
exactly.
with that.
So that's just one of the tools that you can leverage, um, which is powerful enough and easy enough. It's not even complicated. It's easy enough for somebody to say, "Hey, I don't necessarily have access to your location, but I do have access to your network, and I can kind of see all of these different SSIDs, and now I know that you are at least within this area, right? You are in Miami." Right, or you are in this other town or in this other place, and that can be leveraged for whatever, right? Advertising, or it can be leveraged for nefarious reasons.
Do apps
So
ever?
I want to bring this back to the sort of the enterprise focus here. Like obviously there are my individual data is being pulled out and packaged up and sold off. But from an enterprise perspective, do they care? Is there a risk to them about me being just downloading whatever apps I'm using that day and giving them all the
Of course,
permissions?
there is, and I say that because your enterprise is concerned about its data, right? Your corporation
Mhm.
is interested in protecting its data and its IP, right? They want to make sure that these things are secure. So now when you have devices that are siphoning information off of your device, maybe about you, maybe about your corporation, depending on the permissions that you've given it. Because if your corporation has not set up the goals and parameters to protect the data that is residing on that device, then that data is pretty much for anybody that has access to that device to use and abuse. Right. So if you're saying, yeah, you can have pictures, access to my photos and my files, right? But then you went ahead and last week downloaded the financial report that's getting ready to come out, but people don't really, it's not public. But that information is in now in your files locally on your device. There's a possibility, there's a potential that that can get siphoned off, especially now with AI in place, where AI is doing, who knows what it's doing, right? Right? You might say, I'm using this AI because it's going to make my filter look great for, my skin or whatever. Who knows what it's actually doing, what it's actually pulling off of your device. And you had asked earlier, how do you know? That's a great question, right? Because that's a black hole. How do you know? You actually have to sit there and look at what's coming across the wire. And that's really challenging unless you have proper tooling and tool sets that can tell you, hey, this is being pulled from this location. This data is traversing across your wire, and this is where it's going, right? And then once it leaves your device, whatever IP address that it's going to, you might know what it is, you might not know what it is. And there's tools for that, but you will never really have a clear understanding of exactly what they're doing with it. So the idea is to be very skeptical, honestly, right? You have to be skeptical. You also have to have that critical eye of what you're giving permissions to. And then you also have to just make sure that you're being hyper vigilant about the risks that you're taking on your device, right? Should you download that document or should you keep it in the cloud, right? Should that document actually reside on it? Do you actually need it on your device? Or should you just view it in the actual, Teams portal, in the Outlook portal, or keep it in that OneDrive as opposed to pulling it down to your device?
I think I totally get what you're saying, but again, from the enterprise perspective, expecting end users to be hyper vigilant is not a
It's
successful
not.
strategy.
It's not. And it's not their job, to be honest. As the enterprise, you can ask for them to do these things, but they already have an entire job rec that they're fulfilling that probably doesn't
Right,
have
exactly.
in there, I need you to be hyper vigilant with your mobile device and not do X, Y, and Z, right? It's the job of the enterprise to protect the enterprise's data, which means that you now have to build in proper security controls, whether it be something that wraps your data, or you say, hey, we're going to fully manage your devices, or we're going to give you devices that are fully managed, that has all of the controls in place, and we're going to control what comes on and off of that device. Right? You have, as the enterprise, that is your responsibility because it's your IP. But you have to make sure that you're investing in that. Otherwise, just saying, hey, mobile devices are secure because it's an iPhone doesn't work.
This is good timing for me. Or actually, I guess it would have been better timing a few days ago because I taught a workshop on BYOD and mobile security at a B-Sides a few days ago. But one of the things we were talking about is the difference between, what we've been doing with like MDM technologies with device
Mhm.
management, where typically you're kind of putting some security, I'm air quoting lightly, security controls around the device, like screen locks and pins
Mhm.
and things. But like you're describing, typically in those models, that when you view or interact with data, it is downloaded onto the device in most
Yeah.
cases. But then now we have, mobile application management. We've got, session control and proxies where we can sort of divorce the device from the data so that you're kind of, more like viewing it through the window instead of pulling it out of the store. So what are your thoughts about that? Is that a safer approach for enterprises to take? Or can apps still cross boundaries of segmentation and sandboxing? How does that work?
Yeah. When you start to talk about how MDM is an old technology, right? And if you start talking about mandating controls around the device, like the device needs to not be jailbroken or rooted, and the device needs to have a pin that's more than four, digits long, right? You have these controls in place, and that's great, but that is such low-hanging fruit, right? It is enormously low-hanging fruit that if a malicious threat actor was able to get on the device, guess what? They don't care that you have a 4-digit plus pin. Right? They're on there. Like their user has done something, or maybe even not, to get that package onto that device. The fact that there's a 4-digit pin doesn't matter to the threat actor, right? And the fact that it's jailbroken or not doesn't matter to them either. The idea is you have to wrap your applications in a manner that I know that there's a possibility that this device could be wholly compromised, right? That's kind of how you have to think about it, right? Because you don't know the status of people's devices, right? When you're opening up
Yeah.
the doors for BYOD, you're literally bringing in whatever status that their device is in. They could have been like, I saw Mr. Robot last week and I got inspired and, I started jailbreaking and rooting all of my devices, right? Right? I have no clue what I'm doing, but it seemed cool because I saw it on Mr. Robot and I want to do all the things and download all those other different firmwares that I can run. No, no. Like you just have to have the mindset that I need to protect when the corporations and enterprises, I need to protect my IP, my data from whatever device this lands on. If there's some sort of device attestation that I can put into place where I can put in checks and balances about the status of that device, even better. But wrapping your application and wrapping your data is important because it creates a wall, an additional layer of security that is almost like the final step before a threat actor can actually get to your data. So, to answer your question, JJ, you said, you know, are applications truly sandboxed? Eh, yes and no, right? Yes and no, because yes, in the sense that both Apple and Android have done a lot in the sense of, hey, we're going to sandbox these applications. We're going to make sure that they can't reach outside of their bounds and touch out other applications. But if a malicious package is installed on your application, they're going to try to get some level of low hanging or some low level of control, which means that they'll either be able to traverse or they'll be able to put something on there that allows for them to control the device itself as a super
Mm.
user, right? So you're not necessarily so it basically has the same permissions as you. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I need to protect, yes, you need to protect your application from other applications, but you need to protect your application from threat actors that have the ability to traverse the device in many different ways.
What about targeted attacks? If I'm, got some executives who do a lot of traveling, they're on the road or whatever, or they're just potentially high value targets, are there things I can do to specifically focus in on their devices and add extra layers of security?
Absolutely. And I would hope that you implement something like this. So if you're an enterprise, the best thing for you to do is to build out a program that is specially dedicated to them. And I say especially dedicated to them because these are going to essentially they're your roving crown jewels, right? Your
Uh-huh.
whole C-suite has a different level of access to information about your corporation than anybody else, right? And then there's also legal and finance, right? But you're that whole
Right.
enterprise, that whole group of crown jewels that are rolling around, you want to make sure that you have something built around them, a program that can support them as they're moving, because they're not going to stop traveling, right? That's just not going to happen. So you could probably implement something like like burner devices, right? Hey, this executive is going to travel to this said foreign country. Are we going to tell them no, they can't go? Of course we're not. This is a business move. They need to go. So what we can do is we can give them a
Mhm.
burner device that has literally nothing on there, but the tools that they need, and that is completely wrapped and protected by whatever security solution that we have put in place. Also, there's enhanced visibility and limited access to some of the other functions of the device, right? Once they return, they can pick up their personal device or their issued device that has all of the functions that they need to do their job. But you have to build out these specific use cases and fit solutions into answering the problems. So having burner devices that you can leverage and deploy with them, having enhanced visibility is another key element, and then having a contingency plan, right? A contingency plan of like, hey, I think my device is compromised. Okay, what do you do? What do you do next? Right? This is what we would suggest that you do. We're going to put your phone into lockdown mode, and then we're going to also remove access to any of our data. Right? We're going to shut the door on that, and then only going to give you access to a couple key functionalities.
Can we talk about lockdown mode? Because I know one of the things that I keep hearing from everywhere is, if you want to be secure, put your Apple device in lock. I think it's called lockdown mode, and that's the advice I see in a lot of like media and publications. I have heard from other, you know, mobile researchers that really is stupid and doesn't do anything other than block some of the visibility. I'm curious on your take on this. Is this something that's helpful? Is it helpful for a subset of
Yeah.
users and use cases, or is it just
There's levels
rubbish?
to this, right? So
Okay.
I'm gonna go with it depends. But when you start thinking about and I say levels, I mean the level of an attack, right? A low-hanging attack, something that's pretty easy. Lockdown mode may help mitigate that, right? Because well, what it's going to do is it's going to put some limitations around your messaging to ensure that so your any attachments that come through aren't going to get previewed, right? So that's kind of them answering the mail for Pegasus. They're also putting limitations around your web browser, right? And Safari and WebKit. They're also putting limitations around incoming calls, right? FaceTimes are potentially blocked. Photo sharing is limited as well. So basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to shut down as many of the inbound vectors as possible. Problem is, if they're already there, this doesn't really matter, right? So it's almost like you have to run in lockdown mode all the time, which is basically a deprecate. Like it's a dumbed down version of your iPhone, right? You have to run in
Yeah.
lockdown mode all the time, and then you're still not completely secure. So I'd say lockdown mode answers the mail for about 10%, right? 10% of
Mm.
threats out there will be mitigated by lockdown mode. And when I say mitigated, I mean like it'll just make it more challenging. Now, some of the other threats, right, the other 90, uh, it'd be maybe a speed bump, right? But there's another way to get past this. So the things that it shuts down from messaging, web browsing, incoming calls, photo sharing, device and accessory connections, especially with the physical and wired connections, that's relatively useful for if somebody physically has your device, right? And this is what I was saying, like that low hanging fruit. So, for example, if you're going in and out of countries, that maybe you're crossing a border and you happen to have a citizenship that is of interest to that said country, and now they're asking you to come into a different room, right? And they need your phone, and you're like, I'm not giving you my PIN. That's a good time. That's a good time to put your phone into lockdown mode, right? Because shutting down the accessory piece is a pretty key element for someone to get or to find someone to exploit your device when they physically have it. That's one way,
Mm.
right? There are other ways. So it all just depends on how bad an attacker wants access to your device.
I'm thoroughly frightened at this point.
I mean,
I do want to know though. I do want to know, like real
yeah.
real world in the executive
Mhm.
protection, realm where we're talking about, okay, use a
Yeah.
burner phone. How often do you think executives really do that? And is it just for their corporate device? Like, would they still take a personal device and just use a burner corporate phone? Or is this it maybe depends on where you go, you need to leave all traces of yourself here.
I think it really depends on the executive, right? It depends on the executive, and it depends on the company that they're representing. I think for some executives, they totally get it, right? The executives of defense contracting companies, executives that have companies that do business with the U.S. government in some sort of shape or form. They may have had a briefing, they have a better understanding of the threats, but I'd say a lot of executives don't even really comprehend the level of um, prevalence that your device is going to be exploited in some form. Does it mean that there's an attacker sitting on your device from the moment you get off the plane? No. But does it mean that there's a high likelihood that when you land in country, as soon as you turn on your device or it comes out of airplane mode, it's going to talk to the local cell tower, and this local cell tower is going to say, "Hi, welcome to insert whatever country you are. You need to download this package in order to connect to our cellular network." What
Mm.
happens when you download that package? What's in that package? Who knows? Like, and it's happened to us all. And this is where it's like the convenience outweighs the risk at the time, right? Because you're
Yeah.
like, I need access to my network. I got meetings, I got all this stuff coming up, but what's really in that package? So a lot of
And I mean, I've had that happen with not even installing a package when I went somewhere in Asia and landed, and then suddenly weird things were happening. My phone was really hot. I did not install or do or interact with
yeah,
anything, and it was
this
not a good
and this
day.
is exactly what I mean. Like it's not a matter of if, it's just to what degree, right? And your device being, either partially compromised, fully compromised, in my mind, if it's compromised, it's just compromised. Blow it away and stand it back up, or blow it away and get a new one. Honestly, for me, a lot of my practice is what I say is like, just blow it away and get a new one. That's why we do that. We have the burner phone practice, and we can go for it from
Hmm.
there. But the thing is, it's really hard to unseat a exploit that you don't even have visibility of, right?
And let's talk about that. So if something has happened to the phone, um, I want to kind of talk through like what does jailbroken mean, what does
Yeah.
rooted mean, and then storage within the phone, and when you wipe something, because like on a computer, there's certain types of malware that wiping the computer at a certain level does not get rid of the malware.
Right.
So I'm assuming, we have the same thing in phones where there's some level of depth embedded in that device that a simple, factory restore isn't going to work. So can we kind of talk through those, jailbroken, rooted, and then what it means if there's malware on the
Okay.
device?
So let's start with rooted. So rooted is specifically for Android devices. Okay. Jailbroken is specifically for iOS devices. They're pretty much the same thing, but for different names for each. Rooted is essentially where someone has bypassed the security measures that have been put in place by Android to protect the actual operating system from someone that is looking to gain administrative or super user access to that said device. Now, once you get a root, right, much like with a machine, right, a Windows machine, right, yeah,
A
PC,
PC.
right.
Yeah.
Once you get root, it's it's very challenging to go backwards, and a lot of times people achieve root in an effort to install another type of custom um, software, right? Via or custom firmware via some sort of bootloader, right? That they may have got off of the dark web that allows for them to do, script kiddie things or
So it makes sense for an enterprise to block rooted and jailbroken phones, it sounds
100%
like.
because the biggest
Okay.
risk is that, and this is the root and jailbroken, just think of them as basically synonymous. It's the same thing for Android as for iOS. What you're doing is you're removing the inherent security that was built into the device, which means that now that device is exponentially more insecure than what it once was, right? So if you just bought it out
Yeah.
of the store, bare bones, straight out the box, that device is super, when it comes out of the store, it's not secure, but it has like baseline level security, like very low hanging like security.
Better
Better,
than
yeah,
nothing.
better than nothing. This removes it all, right? So now you're just
Okay.
walking around with a device that is very penetrable.
Okay, just so I understand, if I buy the device, own the device, I haven't done anything to it, I'm just turning around and
Mhm,
using it and
mhm.
it's mine. I am not essentially the super user. There are still some security controls in place that keep me from, you know,
Yeah,
messing
because
around with the
you can't
OS.
go to a certain level and start to tweak things in the firmware, for so to speak, right? Like
Okay.
there's a certain level,
Hmm, hmm.
there's basically a GUI that you operate within that keeps you inside this realm of user interface, right? But to go
Yep.
lower
Yep.
than that means that you're going to have to pierce that veil and go into uh, like root or jailbreak.
Okay. That makes
And
sense. Yeah.
and
In
I do want
context like
to
a
Right.
PC,
Exactly.
I can operate as a user or I can operate as root or super admin. And there are privileges and risks that come with that super user
Exactly.
position.
Exactly.
and I want to call out one little other word here, or phrase that gets kind of commingled with these two that's not the same, which is unlocking a phone from a carrier.
Mm,
So that's totally
it's
different.
totally
That's
different.
just you're out of your contract, or you
Right.
can transfer that number if you need to. But I know in a lot of calls there's the rooted, the jailbroken, and the unlocked seem
That gets
to kind of
conflicted,
swirl together.
conflated.
Yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up because that's the context I thought jailbroken was meant. I just unlocked it from
No,
the
so the
carrier.
carriers are
Yeah,
like,
no.
hey, you can use this device only on our network, right? Because we gave it to you under
Hmm.
some discount or under some long contract.
You haven't finished paying for
Right. You haven't
the
finished
phone yet.
paying
You haven't
for
bought
it.
it outright.
And then, so you can only use it on our network. That's the benefit to them, right? That's why the unlocked phones are more expensive.
Hmm.
Yeah, but unlocked is
Okay.
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. Unlocked is fine.
Jailbroken not.
Unlocked does not mean jailbroken, right? And to be honest, right, I don't want to sit here and say like rooting or jailbreaking a device is a trivial feat, especially nowadays. As we've progressed in our security journey and along the lines of having, cellular devices, jailbreaking and rooting of devices has become exponentially more difficult. Like you have to have specific tooling and tool sets that, and I'm talking about your regular user, that you need to leverage in order to do so. Um, Also, I'm pretty sure there's like legal ramifications behind it, right? So, there's a lot of risk involved.
It's that pesky
Yeah, yeah,
EULA
there's that
again.
EULA, right? Like
Mm.
iOS is not playing, like do not jailbreak our devices. But when you look back at who's on the other side of that, like people who are nation state threat actors that are extremely well versed threat actors that know what they're doing, this is a small feat. This is literally put it in the package, send the package will take care of everything else.
So that last little bit that wanted to touch on while we're on this section is like the storage and the data management of like what's on the phone, how stuff is stored. I keep using the word sandbox, and I mean containerized sandbox, segmented from the rest of the tentacles in there. How does that work? And I'm imagining you have a lot of insight into this from your forensics background, that you understand the inner workings of how and where these things are stored on the
Okay,
phones.
sorry. Can you back up just a little bit? My internet literally just cut out. And like you cut out and then you came back and said stored on the phones. And I was like, oh no.
Go.
Yeah, great.
Oh
Yeah.
God. Okay. So in this last little piece here, I was asking about the storage and the
Mhm.
data management, and like are pieces of data stored securely on the phone? How are they accessed? Can the tentacles of the apps get into it? And I was guessing, given your your forensics experience, you probably know all of the inner workings about how these things are landing on the
Yeah,
devices.
so storage, it's interesting because every app is different, right? You have to ask yourself, what is this application doing for me? What am I giving it access to? And what is it doing with that said data? Now, with Androids and with these mobile devices, they leverage these things called SQLite databases. And a lot of times these SQLite
Sorry, SQLite.
Yeah,
Okay.
SQLite databases. And these SQLite databases are essentially places where they will store information that the application will need to reference later that it's gathered about you, right? So sometimes these SQLite databases are possibly encrypted, which is like great, awesome. Because if you get access to that SQLite database, it's like, it's nothing really here. But a lot of times, those SQLite databases are pretty much in the clear, which means that a lot of the data that it has collected about you or about how you leverage that application is there, right? At rest. At rest. So that is
So is there any kind of like segmentation going on or virtualization with it? Like for each app, I spin up a little instance of SQLite, or it's just like one big database and all the apps read from that
yeah.
database?
It's basically a big database that app will access, right?
Okay.
Now,
And hopefully maybe there's some access controls about what that app can access.
hopefully there's, so it's, and that's what boils down to the level of like the permissions that you provide. If you're right, you give it access to this information. Like if you say, I'm giving you access to geolocation and you're like, oh, that's okay. I don't really even use it for the geolocation feature. Don't think it's not collecting the geolocation data. It is, right? Now, this is the caveat is some of these applications just send that data off the device, right? They send it off the device. So when you actually look at these SQLite databases or some of the databases that they actually do leverage, there's nothing there, right? Which is both good and bad because you're like, great, there's nothing at rest. So forensically speaking, if my device gets popped, they won't be able to glean so much about me from looking at this container of data that's
But it's floating up in somebody else's database up in the cloud somewhere.
exactly, which means that data is now somebody else's to behold, right? So it boils down to you having to have visibility of the application. So I wanted to foot stomp on this. As an enterprise,
Did you just say foot stomp on this? Did you foot stomp?
But with much more force.
I wanted to.
All right.
I
You do your foot stomping.
I want to tap dance on this really quick. Let's double click real quick.
Get it on. Double click into it.
For enterprises, this is not where you just throw your hands up, right? For enterprise,
Really, because it freaking feels like this is the point where we throw our hands up. Because what you said is like, pay attention to what apps you're downloading and what permissions you're giving them. And then you're saying, well, they could change their permissions later. The app could change later, and it doesn't matter what permissions you give them because they're going to get what they want anyway. So I'm just ready to teach. I'm going to go teach Tai Chi somewhere.
So the idea behind it is you have to have visibility, right? Because your whole enterprise is probably they all operate off of their mobile device. There's literally no chance that like 99% of your enterprise isn't utilizing a mobile device to do some sort of work. In terms of having visibility of applications, what applications are doing, how they're storing the data, it's a challenge because you now are responsible for figuring out how these applications are operating in your environment, which means that you have to have either a team or proper tooling to help you get those conclusions. When you are able to say, I have my own like enterprise library that we're going to deploy, and we have vet each one of these applications that's inside of our enterprise library, and we know it's not malicious. We know who it's talking to. We know what permissions it's asking for. We know how it's storing the data. We know it's not using deprecated API calls or using deprecated functions, which is huge, right? One API, one deprecated one is the UI WebView, which is one that I see all the time. UI WebView came out with iOS 2. Okay, 2.
Now, I'm not an Apple person, but I know we're at least in
We are
double
at
digits now.
26.
Okay.
Okay, we might have skipped a few recently, but we are at 26. They are still using UI WebView today in the coding of some of these and a lot of applications, right? Which is
And what does that mean for those of us that aren't as smart as you are about
so
this?
UI WebView is basically it's a kit that allows for it's basically a kit that allows for the embedding of web content. So think HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but like think of it back at the time of iOS 2, right? And it allows for JavaScript things to be run. It allows for file access, and it allows for processes to be executed, especially when you start talking about things that are happening, leveraging your WebKit or leveraging Safari, right? So this and
So it sounds almost like just like the deprecated Java crap that we just got rid of on regular laptops.
exactly, right?
Okay. All right, but we're running this in
Right.
mobile
So
devices.
the problem is that it has numerous flaws, which I can rattle off, but the biggest one is it's no longer supported, right? It's completely
Yeah.
deprecated. Nobody is secure. There's no security patches. There's no improvements. There's nothing like nobody's looking for bugs anymore. It's just nobody, it's been sunset, but people still use it in the development of their application. So you can actually,
And Apple allows it in their app store for apps that use this.
yeah, yes, Drew.
You guys listening,
That little laugh
you
was
can't
like
see
patting me on the
Achilles'
head, like, "Oh,
Yeah, no,
summer
no,
child."
it's
Cheshire cat grin over
it's just one of
here.
those things where like I'm not mad at Apple because they have to have applications on their
Right.
on the app store. But the thing is, if you remove applications that leverage this UI web view, that's a lot of applications, right? So forcing them to go to the newer one is problematic because there's so many that use it. So as an enterprise, and this is where I come back to, like as an enterprise, you have to have visibility of this, right? Especially if it's a tool that you're paying someone else to develop or you're paying someone else to use. And now you're putting it into your environment for your enterprise to use, and it's leveraging insecure, deprecated functions, API calls. It has uh, uh, um, insecure hashing algorithms. It's transmitting data in the clear. But you, as the enterprise, are like, this is what I'm using this is the app that we're using to transmit health data, right? Because we're a hospital.
Now,
Uh,
are
uh,
you talking about third-party
Yeah,
apps or apps that an enterprise would develop for their
both.
own use?
Both,
Or
right?
both?
And
Yeah.
because a lot of times enterprises don't necessarily have in-house devs, right? Just sitting on payroll, right? So a lot of times they're third partying that out. So having
Yeah.
the ability to have visibility into these applications and being able to go back to these companies and these devs and say, "Hey, look, we scanned your app. Great, very functional, but there are some massive security issues that we need you to update. We are paying you, and we would ask that you update." I call it scan and demand. Okay, scan the app, demand the change. Because if you get popped, they're just gonna say, "Hey," and who's going to be able to point back to where it came from? Hmm.
Yeah.
right.
So, okay, so I know, uh, from swirling around with friends that do application development stuff and scanning and
Yeah.
analysis and this. What about all these third-party apps, especially on whether it's a corporate device or a personal device? What are some of the tools we have without being a forensics expert to know if apps are doing, weird stuff with our data? How do we know
Yeah.
that?
So that's the challenge, right? When you start talking about tooling, it really boils down to what tooling is out there that is usable by your associates to get you further faster, right? There are tools that you can, cobble together that's going to take 72 hours for you to run, and then another 2 weeks for you to actually scour through all the code and figure out manually. But when you start talking about the different ones that can be leveraged, there I would call, there's the cheaper price tools like MobSF is a tool that you can leverage to do some, I would call like an initial first pass. If you don't necessarily have the budget for it. But then if you actually do get the budget, which I would suggest that you invest, if you actually have applications in your environment, you can invest to a handful of different tools. There are a few, and I don't want to sound biased, right? Again, right? I'm not getting paid by any of these people, but there's Zimperium.
This is not a
Yeah,
sponsored episode.
nobody's paying me, okay? There's Imperium, which I mentioned on the last call. Honestly, I think they have the best suite of tools because they all talk to each other. They also have probably what I would consider to be the best research lab. Like I've met their research team and they're all wizards on another level. Like if just go down the rabbit hole with them, you're just gonna get lost. But then there's other tools. For example, there's tools like Now Secure is one, and a lot of people reference tools like Veracode. And Veracode is it's useful, but Veracode is for when the application is still raw code, right? It's still source code,
Okay.
right? And a lot of people get this mixed up. Vericode's for when it's source code. So as the code's being developed, right, you go through and before you compile it, you scan it with Veracode. And the Veracode will tell you what you need to know. But once you've compiled it, right, then you need to scan it again. And that's where I find a lot of flaws because Vericode's not scanning those third-party libraries. Right?
Yep.
Once that thing's compiled, you're now looking at a lot more that's being leveraged. Also, you need to do dynamic and static. So it's called MAST, the Mobile Application Scanning Tool, right? Dynamic or static is like, hey, we're looking at this tool or we're looking at this application statically. Like it's not doing anything. It's literally just here, it's code. But when you start doing the dynamic, it's looking at how the application is behaving when it's being leveraged. And that's when you start to get into the juicy stuff. So when you start looking into those third-party libraries and what they're calling, how they're calling, what they're leveraging, that's when you start to realize, oh, that third-party library that was leveraged is very antiquated. And it opens us up and exposes us to a lot of risks. And the only tool that I've found that is able to do exactly that is Zimperium's Zscan. So, like I said, not a sponsored talk, but I have used several of these different tools, and Zimperium Zscan is in my opinion, beyond reproach.
So you mentioned MobFS, Zimperium, Now Secure, and Veracode. We'll have links to all of those.
Mob SF. And that's one for like, and that one's pretty straightforward, right? But just know that there's going to be a bit of an uplift leveraging that tool, right? When you start talking about tools that are being made for the end user in mind, it's going to be at the top in terms of user friendly. It's going to be Zimperium, and then down the chain.
You get what you pay for.
And so this is where it's so important because a lot of enterprises will say like we have 100 apps that we leverage. Well, that's a lot of scanning, right? That's a lot of scanning. Like, and you're not going to want to be hindered or hampered by a tool that takes a long time to scan, gives you some sort of kind of confusing response, and then next thing you know, you're Googling or trying to chat GPT or Gemini what this actual framework or what this actual third-party library, this SDK is. For some of these tools, and I'm speaking specifically now about Zimperium, they actually have it built out in the actual application. So you can look at it and say, here are the four or five red flags, and these are the things that we need fixed. So that's when you turn around and do your scan and demand, and you say, hey, app developer, hey, third party company, you all need to fix this. And the funny thing is, I literally just had this happen. I'm not going to say with whom, large entity that provided an application, and we scanned it and we said, hey, did you know that you guys have these issues with this app? And they go, well, we did not know because we actually acquired that company and acquired the application. Therefore, we're not looking at the security of it. We just want to sell it. Right? And we said, well, we're not buying until you fix this. So those are just some examples, but that's the best way that you can keep your enterprise safe, is by taking control of the applications that are in there and then scanning those and knowing what's actually in your environment and what it's doing.
Well, Akili, we've kept you for more than an hour, and I feel like we could probably go even more hours. So we're good. If you're willing, we'd love to have you back again. But in the meantime, if folks want to reach out to you online, are you on the socials? Are you blogging? Where can folks
You
find
can actually find me on LinkedIn. That is the best place that you'll be able to find and reach me.
Awesome. LinkedIn, we'll have that link in the show notes. Well, thank you again, Akili. And thanks to everyone who's listening for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If there's a topic you want us to talk about, or if you've got a comment, correction, or question, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up, and we really do appreciate when listeners reach out. And just so you know, Packet Protector is part of the bigger Packet Pushers podcast network that includes more than a dozen technical podcasts for professional development on networking, security, IPv6, DevOps, professional development, and more. We've also got an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, a community Slack group, a YouTube channel, and an IRC group. You can find it all at packetpushers.net, all free, no login required. Thanks for listening.